The core tenet, I think, that is sometimes overlooked and is really important in screenwriting is that story is character and character is story. You know, it took me 2 years of writing scripts that didn't get that at UCLA till I wrote that one script where all of a sudden it clicked in my brain that you actually have to fuse those two things together or your script won't have your character's arc and it won't have rising stakes. So I have sort of reduced it down to 5 rules of screenwriting. The first one is conflict or die. And what I mean by this is films that are good always have what I reduce this down to sort of 3 types of conflict. The first 2 you have to have, they're essential, and the third is sort of like, I would say it's, you know, your backup conflict, or last resort conflict is the better term. So the first one is that overt, sort of obvious conflict. You know, in Jaws, they got to kill the shark. In Groundhog Day, he's got to stop the days from repeating. In Liar Liar, he's got to get his client off. And then the second type of sort of conflict is that existential conflict or dilemma that your main character has. And you know, it would looking at the same films, in Jaws, they got to kill the shark, but the police chief is terrified of the water. And Liar Liar, he's got to, you know, get his clients exonerated, but he has to first stop lying to himself and his loved ones. And let's see, Groundhog Day. In Groundhog Day, you know, he has to sort of stop the repeating days, but he has to you know, figure out how to not be so narcissistic and self-centered in order to unlock the cycle. So you can see in all of those films that your main challenge is directly linked to the existential crisis that your characters are undergoing. So those are the 2 ones that every great film you can find those 2 types of conflict in there. The third type of conflict, that offset conflict, is only used in desperate times. And that's when you have a scene that you know you have to get exposition out and your character's arc isn't really moving forward, and you don't have, you're not really rising the stakes that much. And usually you want to avoid writing scenes like that. Those are the worst kinds of scenes. They slow down scripts, it's not good. But if you have a scene like that, this offset or last resort conflict is like, the very bad example is 2 characters are talking and you know, they're over here and they don't realize that there's a candle and the wax is dripping and now it's top heavy and it's fallen over and there's a curtain that's going to light on fire and the fire is starting. So that's offset conflict that doesn't have anything to do with your character's interaction or conflict between them or, you know, contributing to the story arc. But you still have tension that the audience is engaged in wrapped around that scene that is mostly expositional. So that's one kind of rule, I would say, that you want to adhere to. Or try for. So the next thing is, it's your job to really bully your characters. And what I mean by that is, if it's in human nature to actually see a problem and solve it or make it better. Well, for most humans. Some humans don't have that nature. But so what I would say is, as a writer, that's the exact opposite thing to do. So I've seen because I do actually do individual screenwriting instruction and tutoring, which is the right script tutor. So what I've seen time and again is that newer writers will have a problem in scene A and solve it in scene B, and have a problem in scene C and solve it in scene D, and that is a sure way to sort of flatline the rising stakes of your story. So what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you set up a conflict and your protagonist partially solves it, and then it's a new problem that's bigger, and your protagonist partially solves that problem, and then it's a new problem and it's bigger, all the way to the point of that, you know, beginning of Act 3 climactic battle where they either win or lose. So that's kind of relates to rising stakes. Really quickly, the make me care part. A lot of times people talk about sympathetic characters and creating characters that the audience likes. And I think sympathetic characters to me actually just means characters that you can root for And really, you can have a character that you root wholeheartedly for, or you can have a character that you root for just a little bit more than the other guy, which is where you get those complex characters that are just enough more likable than that villain that you're trying to like root against. And the yin to that yang is a villain who is actually complex, which means to me, you know, you want to be rooting, you want your audience to be rooting against the villain, but you also, I find villains that are charming or charismatic or complex or not all one thing far more interesting. So that's what I would clarify about likable characters. Don't get hooked on likable, get hooked on, is this protagonist root for-able, that's good English, and is this villain root againstable? I'm gonna just keep with that. If you can cut it, get rid of it. The test that I kind of apply to ink on the page is, I think of every extra drop of ink on the page as budget you're wasting, and that's what the result is in the read, is that the script slows down, a producer disengages, and you can feel that. You can see that you don't need that action line, you don't need that descriptive word, you don't need that extra bit of dialogue, another line on that end when you have the best outline is kind of right before the last line that you've written. So I would just be really aggressive in cutting those things that you can. And that doesn't mean not to write things beautifully or evocatively. You want beautiful language, but not at the expense of story and character moving forward. So I think that's something to focus on as well. This is the last one, and I think sometimes in the attempt to get a project that is going to be commercial or get a project that's going to get enough attention to get funding, we kind of can lose ourselves in the process sometimes. And I think it's really essential to continue as writers to tap into your own very unique perspective on the world, which then flavors the characters you create and the stories you tell. And so this is maybe an embarrassing example, but or telling. So a couple months ago, you know how you're walking down the street and like there's someone that's slow in front of you and you know you're gonna have to pass them because you've got to go somewhere faster. In my head, I realized at one point that I kind of, I have like a silent competition with them that they don't know we're in. Like I'll be walking and and all of a sudden I'll realize, oh, I gotta move faster. And then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get around them. And then like, as I'm passing them, I start to feel bad, like, oh, I'm showing them up. Man, that's mean. And then I get around them and there's a little silent celebration. I'm like, oh, great. And that's weird. That's a weird thing to have going on in your head when you're just passing someone on the street. And, but then I thought, well, how is that usable? And am I the only one who does that? Or do other people do that? And it's just one of those things that goes on in your head that if you pay attention to those things, those weird quirks, your biases, you can actually take advantage of those and use them in creating scenes or characters or stuff like that. So that was, so that's just mostly tapping into the true you as you present characters and story. So I thought next we would watch this little short film. It's a minute. And I wanted to watch it because it really, it so concisely sets up the Aristotle was the first one to talk about the 3-act structure, and this film really just kind of does it, and it's pretty cute. So we'll watch it. It's only a minute. you know, in terms of crafting your story, it's kind of a great example because you have the status quo at the beginning. He's walking along. You have two characters with distinct personalities and points of view. Then you have a conflict, the borders thrown down, and then you have battle with rising action. First it's just a yo-yo, hits him in the face, it's on the other side, then it's an airplane that knocks him into the other side. And you know, then you have a resolution, oh wait, we're gonna make this border into a game. And then you have a cliffhanger ending, like what's gonna happen with the green guy. So I just kind of wanted to use that because then, and also all that while sort of subtly delivering a pretty cool message, I think, this is what I find it, about tolerance and peace and that kind of stuff. So I just thought, okay, well, what if that were a feature film? Like, and you sort of build out and you go, well, what if the beings, the beings or beans, were brother and sister? And what if instead of a border, it was a fence or a really wide river? And what if the brother has a cure and the sister's sick? And what if actually the river is an ocean? And so then you sort of, by doing that, you're building out obstacles for your characters. And that's how you kind of dig into your act two. But that's all fine and good. What you really have to do is link the obstacles directly to that internal conflict or existential issue that main character is sort of working against. So that's kind of just a quick way to look at how do you actually start to build out from a very simple concept, a middle of your second act and rising action. And then of course at the end, either your character changes and triumphs in that battle and you have a happy ending, or your character stays the same and is destined to repeat and you have a tragedy. So I guess one of the main points I would say, which I think I find helpful because I think there's a lot of pressure when you're trying to figure out those second acts, which are the worst part of writing. It's that story is actually architecture, and the quotients are just actually math and, the quotients are just plot and character motivation and conflict. And so if you think about screenwriting as, because it is creative and lovely and, not a hard science, of course, but if you allow yourself to actually think of screenwriting as architecture, then it's not surprising that it's hard. And maybe you give yourself a little more slack when you have those writing blocks or you have that sort of delay and you need to think out the structure, because actually engineering and architecture is hard. So I think that's kind of something to keep in mind. I just kind of wanted to go over, I call it sort of, I'm trying this out, the twist concept test. And you're going to spend a lot of time working on these projects, and so you might want to really make sure that it actually fits, before you dive into it, a certain basic test, which I just take a look at a lot of log lines. So the first one, which is Shape of Water. At a top secret research facility in the 1960s, a lonely janitor falls in love with an amphibious creature that is being held in captivity and determines to help it escape. When aspiring film actor Greg meets the weird and mysterious Tommy Wiseau in an acting class, they form a unique friendship and travel to Hollywood to make their dreams come true, and the worst movie ever made. So you get the picture, kind of. After the police fail to catch her daughter's killer, an enraged mother directly challenges the local authorities, demanding they solve her daughter's murder. So what you start to see is definitely a pattern. And if you kind of take the identifiers and the proper nouns out and replace them with generic terms, you start to see that all of these concepts have a hero, a world, an inciting incident, a main battle or challenge, and a main goal, and sometimes an antagonist. So in this first one, you have a character-driven piece, which is basically an aspiring actor, Greg, meets Tommy, and you have the disaster artist format of the concept. Then in the next one, you have, it's based, the point of entry is the inciting incident. So that would be the police failing to catch the killer, so you've got 3 billboards format, basically. For this next one, you've got Miguel wanting to be a musician, so he, enters the land of the dead, which is that format for Coco. And then the last one is, a world-specific story, which starts like Shape of Water in a research facility in the 1960s. So if you kind of take a look at those, you can start to make sure that your concept actually has all of those key ingredients before you dive into it. And then if you have all of those key ingredients, you at least know that, well, all these films had these key ingredients, so I'm pretty sure I can make something out of this. And I think it's important to really put your concept before you dive into all the work and the research and whatever is needed to actually write that screenplay, to just test the concept out and make sure it actually fits these sort of basic tenets of good screenwriting. I was just kind of going to say that you have, of course, the original genres are drama and comedy, and then these are all the classic ones that we all know. And then I kind of wanted to sort of talk a little bit about tone and how tone relates to genre. And I think what you sort of, for me, tone kind of relates to that middle ground of or merging of different types of projects. So you can kind of see, like, if you merge comedy and dramedy, you get dramedy, and then you get kind of films that are like a war film that's funny, or a superhero film that's outrageous, or animated feature that's really surprising. And I think that's just something to keep in mind in terms of when you're looking at the tone of your project after you've got that concept locked in. You want to kind of take a look at, well, where am I kind of wanting to land? And the thing is, what I love about these is these are all sort of inventive. They're new ways to look at classic films, and I think that's what people are having a lot of fun with. And I think it's always good to try and figure out, what your tone is, which relates back to getting inside your own head and figuring out, what is my, my druthers when it comes to this character, or what, would be the most unique version that only I see in my head.